Okay, today we are going to be assembling a pre-soldered kit overthrow. So this is available on our website separately. These are nice to have tools, but everything you see here comes with a pre-soldered overthrow slammer kit with radio, and there's also a charger. Go ahead and unbox it just for timeliness. If you buy a pre-soldered kit and a radio at the same time, then they're already bound. And again, we've got our servo battery wheels with collets. This is the set of slammer arms that we will add in a later video. And we're gonna build Overthrow, previously known as Slipper. So on your harness, you can see that you've got your switch battery connector to the Malenki. Then you've got your servo connector, your motor connectors with the motors on them. That's how they come out of the bag. The first step is to set up the servo. So the servo in Overthrow actuates the flipper, and that will be going from pulling it forward to flipping it back. So it will go spline towards the back of the bot, and we will have gotten the white single arm servo horn out of the bag. There's one with 2 and one with 4. So we want the white single side servo horn. We're also going to get out 2 of the self-tapping screws that come in the servo baggie. Now there is an extra small black servo horn screw in the bag. Don't lose that because it's an unusual thread and hard to replace. There's also a finger tight one already installed. So the first thing to do is to power up our Malenki. So I will make sure that that's turned off. These are our new batteries. And when this is installed in the bot, the wires will tuck into the corner, and we want the discharge wire with only the discharge cable with just 2 wires to be closest to the battery. So often you'll have to kind of tuck the charging cable, the one with the 3 wires, through that, and then this will be snugged up against the battery itself. And then our charging cable will go to the charge mount right there. So check that it was off so I can connect the battery. Then I'll grab my servo, and checking that I'm going yellow to yellow and brown to brown, I'll connect the servo to the servo connector, and making sure that I don't have anything metal touching anywhere on the Malenki. Go ahead and switch this on. So it comes on just solid red. That means it's already bound to this. If you let this sit for about 60 seconds, you'll see the fast flashing blue come back on, which means this is back into auto bind. Because these 2 are already bound, when I turn this on, notice that the solid blue light came on, and if I move the motors, then it also woke the servo up. So because this was on long before that, it was technically in configuration mode until I moved the motors. But what I'm wanting to do is set up the servo. So you can see that when the servo is installed and the weapon's down, then it'll be the arm will be slightly forward, and then when I do that, it'll whip back and actuate the flipper. So I'm going to unscrew the small black servo horn screw, and what I want is with the servo down, it will be about 45 degrees forward, and forward being towards the front of the bot like that, and then when I push it up, it'll be about 45 degrees to the back. So I know it doesn't quite get to 45 in the forward stroke, and I'm happy to get a little more than that in the back. So that is actually exactly where I want it. So now that the horn is on and it's where I want it, I can go ahead and turn off the bot, turn off the radio, put my servo horn screw in so that it stays in the correct position. Now this is a steel screw into a steel spline. So I can snug that up quite tightly because this is the weapon and it's steel into steel, so it'll hold a good amount. Now, the way that this mounts into the chassis, we have these micro servo adapters. You'll notice that there's a split in the bottom, and it needs to go into the chassis like that. So ears down, smooth side, towards the spline on the servo, and you just gently open that, just slip it around the body, and then snap it closed. Notice that it just clears that. That'll go in the chassis like that. At this point, we'll go ahead and secure the servo to the micro servo adapter. It's a fair number of twists, so I'm going to go ahead and use the slightly nicer to hold Phillips driver. And we'll have these available on our website. This one actually ratchets. Now this is a steel screw going into plastic. The other thing is you want to make sure that the micro servo adapter is tight against the sides. You want that gap to be all the way closed. So you can't go nuts with your twisting on this, but you definitely do want it to be snug because it is the weapon mount. Again, on this side, I'll run this in. Now, if you are using an electric screwdriver for this, make sure it does not go too fast, because even if you don't bottom out and strip the hole, going too fast into plastic can actually melt the hole. So there's that. We'll go ahead and disconnect that from the harness. I'll disconnect the battery from the harness while I'm at it. Now, it is easiest to install the servo next when there's nothing else in the way in the bot. So we'll go ahead and tuck that in place. It fits nice and snug. Now for these, we will use the included black self-tapping screws. You can use either of the included 1.5mm drivers. Some people find the T-handle to be easier to twist. It has a ball end, so it puts up with the angle a little bit more. But now again, this is into plastic, so you want it snug, but don't go nuts. If you do strip these holes, we have 2.5mm screws also available. So these are M2. We have M2.5 so that available. So if you strip them, you don't have to scrap the chassis right away. So with the servo mounted, the next step is putting the charging connector in. It's really, really nice to have the charge connector mounted because it makes it easy to just plug the charger on, in between matches. Now, it's necessarily tight because you want it to hold it well. With these, if you use a set of flush cutters and just barely knock the corners off, keep your finger over it so you don't shoot the piece across the room, but not even all the way down to the white square, just barely knock the two corners off. Then you'll slide this in the charge mount. And you should hear it snap in place. And that holds it nice and firmly there. The next step will be installing the switch. So the switch also mounts quite firmly. If you notice that there's sharp burrs on the edges of this, sometimes it's nice to just take a little file and knock the burrs down a little bit so that when this slides into place, it's a little bit easier to do that. So if you look in here, you can see the round ramps. So the switch mount was designed to go in with the actual plastic slide first, and then you're going to rotate it into place, and that way it's held very firmly and it can't push up into the bot. So again, I'm gonna stick the black in first, like kind of into the hole, and then I'm gonna turn it into place. You should hear it click firmly, then it's nice and secure. So again, with the cables into that bottom right corner, the next thing I'm gonna do is connect my battery connector. I'm gonna make sure my switch is off, which will mean switch in, and staying aware of polarity, so red to red, black to black. Notice there's also the bumps to help you only put it in correctly. We'll connect the battery connector, and then we tuck the battery itself into the corner. It should fit snugly without flexing the chassis. And then we will want to tuck the battery connector in between the battery and the switch. And it is necessarily tight and tidy, so the wires will route towards the corner, so that if you do have to change a battery at an event, it's easy to get that out. The Malenki actually will tuck in right here. It'll be on an angle with the top slightly towards the back of the bot. Now you'll notice that the motors have different length leads. So the longer lead will go on the left. So with the bot facing that way, the left is over here. And that motor motor connector will be closer to the back. So if you want to get our servo connector, it's going to end up there. And then, like I said, our left motor is on the longer leads, and then our right motor will tuck in here. Now, these chassis have motor retention features. So if you look in here, you can see that there's bars along the top that it'll snap past. You don't want to damage those with the edges of the gearbox. You also don't want to flex the chassis open too far. So what you want to do is definitely don't put it down on a table and press it in, because that will definitely damage those retention features a little bit, because you're holding the bottom of the chassis flat. What you want to do is hold this in your hand, have it lined up square, and you're going to gently flex the chassis open just a bit as you push it in. And when you do it right, you'll have almost no stress marks here, and you won't have damaged the retention features at all. So again, the right side motor connector will stay closer to the Malenki. The left side motor connector actually often rounds above, but it will tuck in behind the right one. And I like to make sure that I can see the RPM on the top of the motors. So again, holding the whole chassis in your hands, lining this up, and slightly flexing the chassis, it snaps in place. There's actually no visible mark there, so that was a good one. Then we can, and we're sure that all of our wires will tuck in where we want them. So left should be up closer to the back. It's the longer lead, and servo connector is out of the way. We'll connect I go ahead and take the wire tie off. So yellow to yellow and brown to brown. So our servo is connected correctly. And the servo connector itself will tuck in right next to the servo. These wires can be set all the way into that corner. So that is all of the electrical components installed to the bot. It's never a bad idea to check and make sure things are connected and working, so you can turn that on. Can you see the solid red light? Turn this on, and my motors work, and my servo horn works like it should. So then I'll turn the radio off, turn the bot off right away. Now you don't want to over discharge a LiPo battery. You can permanently damage it if you were to leave the bot on overnight. So the next thing that I like to do at this stage is to go ahead and zip tie the motors. Now these motors are already held in quite tightly. The zip ties are kind of back up and they get real hot. It's nice to have that. So anytime you're using a zip tie, you need to be aware of where is the tail gonna end up? Like where is the connector gonna end up? Where's the tail gonna end up? So I want these tails to be right at that back edge. So I'm gonna go down in front of the motor, back up behind the motor, through the tail. We want these really, really snug. The tighter these are, kind of the better it'll drive. I'm gonna snag my needle nose and I'm gonna roll the tail. I'm gonna grab the tail and kind of roll it against the head to get it as tight as I can. I can see that it's very flush on the bottom. Then I'll use my flush cutters to cut the tail so it's not sharp. And same thing on the other side, where thinking about where I want my tail to end up, go down in front of the motor, go back up behind the motor, put the tail through the head, snug it up with my hands, being aware of like getting that head to be right on that back edge so it doesn't leave any slack next to it. And with a rolling motion, I'll use the needle nose to tighten that all the way down. Then I'll use the flush cutters to trim that clean so it's not sharp. All right, so the motors are all the way in. The next step will be assembling the plow. So the whole weapon stack will be, right arm, left arm, then our short spacer, the link from the arm assembly to the servo horn, and then the long spacer. I may just take the aluminum rod, go through the long spacer, through the link, through the short spacer, to the left arm. You can only go in one side because there's caps on the sides to keep the rod from coming out. And then we'll put the right side on. Those should go all the way flush to the ends. Our top armor will go on and keep this the right distance apart. So you can use either of those included hex drivers. This is the only low speed small electric screwdriver that we found. It's actually a variable speed because again, you don't want to run these into plastic too fast. So I'm looking for about 1 revolution a second. So even if I don't bottom it out, if I go too fast, it will melt the plastic. Keeping that nice and slow. Snug that up. Now this is all into plastic and holding plastic, so you also don't want to get too tight. So that's our weapon assembly assembled. You can see that how it'll go right there. We'll go ahead and put the plow on now too. You'll notice the detents, those will made up some retaining features within the plow. So these will snap in. It may take a little bit of force, but once they're in there, then they don't need any glue. They really don't even need screws, but we will put the screws in at the end. So that assembly ready to go. The next step will be paperclip. So we include these large paper clips, and and we'll straighten out 2 bends worth. You can see how long that is, and then we will use the cutters on the inner edge of the pliers to cut it. Better to be a little short than at all long, because you don't want something sharp sticking out the end of the bot. The paper clips are actually on the harder side, so if you probably don't want to use flush cutters that have a really nice edge. So I'm just making sure that that won't stick out at all. So I'm going to go in from this direction. What I want to do is put a V-bend on this end. So I want it to live in there. So within about a 1/2 inch of the end, I'm going to take this and I'm just going to kink it up a little, kink it back down a little, and then kink this back to straight. So that V-bend will generally keep that quite secure in there. Coming in from the non-V-bend side. Keep the wires fully within the bot. Now if you need to push harder on this, you want to grab down near the end and pull as much as possible so that you don't end up jabbing yourself with the end of the paper clip. There we go, and then once the V-bend gets there, it will get a little bit harder to push, but that's where it's more important to do small pushes right near the end so that you don't break it, and you don't want to put your thumb right here and end up jamming that into your thumb. If it's too hard to push in, then you may have gotten too aggressive with the V-bend. You want to pull it back out and take a little bit of those sharper corners out of it. So there we go, fully inside on both sides. There's our weapon package installed. You can see here it lines up nicely where we can run a screw through the link into the horn. And we'll do this again with one of these small black self-tappers. And we'll go into the second hole from the end. If you go into the first hole, then the end of the horn will tend to hit the top armor. So again, we're screwing this into the second hole in the servo horn. What's often good to do is get it snug and then back it off a 1/2 turn or so that it pivots nicely on that screw. Again, we'll want the blanky top edge towards the back. We can at this point go ahead and set up the servo. I'll show that in a minute.